I never thought I'd be standing at my father-in-law's funeral, feeling like a stranger in a family I'd loved for 15 years. But there I was, clutching a damp tissue in my hand, watching my husband Daniel's back as he stood with his mother and sister by the casket. He hadn't looked at me once since we arrived. Not once. The morning had started, like any other day of grief. I'd woken up early to press Daniel's black suit, made sure his tie was the one his father had given him last Christmas. I'd even baked those lemon cookies that Daniel's mom loved, thinking they might bring her a small comfort. I wanted to be there for them. For him. After all, George had been more than just my father-in-law. He'd been the father I never had. My own dad left when I was 3. I grew up watching my mom work 2 jobs, watching other kids get picked up by their fathers from school while I waited for the bus. So when I met Daniel at 24, and his father welcomed me with open arms and that warm smile of his, God, it meant everything to me. George would call me kiddo and ruffle my hair like I was his own daughter. He taught me how to change a tire, how to negotiate a car price, how to make his famous barbecue sauce. All the things a father teaches. The funeral home smelled of lilies and old wood, that peculiar scent that seems to exist only in places where people come to say goodbye. I'd been sitting in the 3rd row, right behind the family section, because Daniel had told me that morning that the first 2 rows were for immediate family only. It stung, but I understood. Grief makes people do strange things, need strange boundaries. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But when the service ended and people started gathering in the reception hall, something shifted. Daniel's sister, Michelle, walked right past me without a word. His mother, Carol, who I'd spent countless Sundays baking with, who'd taught me her mother's recipes, looked through me like I was made of glass. And Daniel was suddenly surrounded by relatives I'd met a dozen times, laughing at old stories, accepting condolences, and acting like I didn't exist. I approached him carefully, holding 2 cups of coffee. Daniel, honey, I brought you some coffee. You haven't eaten anything all day. My voice was soft, gentle. I knew he was hurting. He turned to look at me, and I'll never forget the coldness in his eyes. Those same eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room. Emma, he said, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. You're not family anymore. I think it's best if you left. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step back, coffee sloshing over the rim of one of the cups, burning my hand. I barely felt it. What do you mean? Daniel, what are you talking about? I mean exactly what I said. This is a time for family. Real family. He emphasized those last 2 words, and I saw his mother nodding behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line. I stood there, frozen, as conversations around us stopped. People were staring. I could feel their eyes on me, could hear the whispers starting. My face burned with humiliation, but more than that, my heart was shattering. This was the man I'd loved for 15 years, the man whose hand I'd held through his college finals, through his mother's cancer scare, through every up and down life had thrown at us. Daniel, please, can we talk about this outside? I don't understand. What's happening? My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. I didn't want to cry here, not in front of all these people. There's nothing to talk about. Just go, Emma. Please. He turned his back on me then, completely, and his sister put her arm around his shoulders like she was protecting him. From me, from his own wife. I left. What else could I do? I walked out of that funeral home with my head down, tears streaming down my face, and drove home in a daze. Our home. The house we'd bought together 5 years ago. The one with the blue shutters I'd insisted on. The garden I'd spent 3 summers perfecting. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Inside, everything looked the same. The photos on the wall, our wedding picture on the mantel, Daniel's coffee mug still in the sink from that morning. But nothing felt the same. Nothing would ever feel the same again. I called my best friend Rachel. He threw me out, I sobbed into the phone. At his father's funeral. Rachel, he said, I'm not family anymore. I don't understand what I did wrong. Rachel came over immediately, held me while I cried, and helped me piece together the day. But we couldn't make sense of it. There'd been no fight, no warning signs. Yes, Daniel had been distant since his father got sick 3 months ago, but I'd attributed that to stress, to grief. He was watching his father die slowly. Of course he was pulling away. I'd tried to give him space while still being there, still being supportive. That night, Daniel didn't come home. I called him 15 times. Every call went to voicemail. I texted. I even sent an email. Nothing. I lay in our bed, on his side, breathing, in the scent of his cologne on the pillow, and wondered if I was losing my mind. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. A bank alert. I almost ignored it. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, existing in that strange fog that grief and shock create. But something made me open it, and that's when my world tilted completely off at sea. Access. Checking account transfer. $47,000 moved to account ending in 8392. My hands started shaking. I opened the banking app with trembling fingers. Our savings account. The account we'd been building for years, saving for the down payment on a bigger house. Maybe for starting a family. It was almost empty. He'd left exactly $500. $500 out of $47,000. I called the bank immediately. I need to know about this transfer. I didn't authorize this. The customer service representative, a kind-sounding woman named Patricia, checked the account. Ma'am, according to our records, this transfer was authorized yesterday at 2:47 p.m. by the primary account holder, Daniel Morrison. Yesterday, during his father's funeral. While I was sitting in that reception hall, being humiliated and dismissed, he'd been... What? Hiding in a bathroom transferring our life savings? Where did it go? What account? My voice was rising, panic setting in. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can only tell you it was transferred to an account at a different institution. I can't access information about accounts at other banks. An account at a different institution. An account I didn't have access to. An account I didn't even know existed. I hung up and immediately drove to Daniel's mother's house. If he wouldn't answer my calls, I'd confront him in person. I'd demand an explanation. 15 years of marriage didn't just evaporate overnight. There had to be a reason. Had to be something I could fix. Could understand. Carol answered the door, and her expression when she saw me was pure ice. Emma, what are you doing here? I need to speak to Daniel. Please, Carol. I need to understand what's happening. Daniel doesn't want to. See you. I think you should leave. Carol, please. You know me. You've known me for 15 years. Whatever's going on, we can work through it, but I need to talk to him. He took all our money. He won't answer my calls. I'm his wife. Something flickered in her eyes then. Was it guilt? Satisfaction? I couldn't tell. Not for long, she said, quietly, and closed the door in my face. I stood there on the porch where I'd sat drinking lemonade with her just last month, planning George's birthday party. The birthday he never made it to. Not for long. Not for long. The words echoed in my head as I drove home. Was he planning to divorce me? Had he been planning this? But why? What had I done? I spent the rest of that day going through everything. Our emails, our text messages, our bank statements from the past year. I was looking for something, anything, that would explain this sudden shift. An affair? But Daniel barely had time for me, let alone someone else. Money problems? We were comfortable, not rich, but stable. His father's illness? That had brought stress, yes, but we'd faced it together, or so I thought. Then I found the folder. It was on his laptop, which he'd left at home in his rush to get to the funeral. A folder labeled New Start. Inside were documents. So many documents. Apartment listings in the city, 3 hours away. A new job offer he'd accepted 2 weeks ago and never mentioned to me. Bank statements for an account in his name only, one he'd apparently been building for 8 months. And then I found the emails, hundreds of them. Between Daniel, his mother, and his sister. The earliest ones dated back to right after George's cancer diagnosis. "Mom's right," Michelle had written. "Dad's going to leave everything to you, but you need to make sure it stays in the family. You know how Dad feels about Emma. He might do something stupid." "She's not really one of us," Carol had written in another. "She came from nothing. We need to protect what's ours." And Daniel, my Daniel, the man I'd loved, the man I'd built a life with. No, I'm working on it. Once Dad's gone, I'll handle the Emma situation. The Emma situation. That's what I was to him. A situation to be handled. I read through months of correspondence. They'd been planning this. Planning to push me out. To make sure that whatever George left behind stayed within their blood family. They'd convinced Daniel that I was some kind of gold digger, even though I'd never asked for anything. Even though I worked full-time as a teacher and contributed equally to our household. There were messages about how they needed to make sure I wasn't there when the will was read. How Daniel should create distance before his father passed. How they'd found him an apartment and a new job in a different city so he could start fresh, without the baggage. I was the baggage. Me. The woman who'd loved George like a father, who'd sat by his hospital bed reading him his favorite books, when the chemo made him too tired to hold them himself. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. According to the emails, they expected George to leave everything to Daniel as his only son. The house, the investments, the small but successful hardware store he'd built from nothing. They'd estimated it at close to $1.5 million, and they were terrified George might have left me something, anything, that would waste their inheritance. I didn't sleep that night, or the next night. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were swollen from crying, my hair unwashed, my face pale. I looked like a ghost. I felt like one. Rachel came over again. "You need a lawyer, Emma. Right now. He can't just take your money and abandon you. I don't even care about the money," I said, and I meant it. "I just want to understand why. Why did he stop loving me? What did I do wrong?" "Oh, honey." Rachel pulled me into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong. They're awful people. I'm so sorry you're going through this. But I did get a lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen who listened to my story, with a carefully neutral expression, and then said, 'We're going to take him for everything he's got.' I don't want revenge," I told her. "I just want what's fair." "Fair is revenge in this case," she replied. "Trust me." The day of the will reading arrived. I wasn't planning to go. Why would I? I wasn't family, remember? But that morning, I received a phone call from George's attorney, a man named Henry Walsh who I'd met several times over the years. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to confirm you'll be attending the reading this afternoon. It's essential that you're there." "Mr. Walsh, I don't think I'm welcome. Daniel made it very clear that I'm not considered family." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Morrison, Emma." George made it very clear in his instructions that you were to be present. In fact, he was quite insistent on it. I strongly encourage you to attend. 2:00, my office." Something in his tone made me agree. I dressed carefully, wearing the blue dress George had always said made my eyes look like sapphires. I did my makeup, fixed my hair. If this was going to be my final interaction with the Morrison family, I was going to face it with dignity. I arrived at Mr. Walsh's office at exactly 2:00. The receptionist led me to a conference room where Daniel, Carol, and Michelle were already seated on one side of a long table. The shock on their faces when I walked in would have been comical if the situation wasn't so painful. "What is she doing here?" Carol stood up, her voice sharp. Mr. Walsh entered behind me. "Mrs. Emma Morrison was specifically requested to be present by Mr. George Morrison. Please, everyone, take your seats." Daniel wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. I sat down across from them, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. Mr. Walsh settled at the head of the table with a thick folder. "Thank you all for coming. I'll be reading the last will and testament of George Arthur Morrison, dated March 15th of this year. That was 3 weeks before his passing, and he was of sound mind and body when he made these provisions. 3 weeks before he died. George had been in the hospital by then, weak but alert. I'd been there that day, actually. I'd brought him crossword puzzles and sat with him while Carol and Michelle went to lunch. He'd held my hand and told me I was the daughter he'd always wanted. I thought he was just being sweet. I didn't know he was saying goodbye. Mr. Walsh began reading. The first part was standard, some small bequests to friends, donations to charities. Then he got to the major provisions. "To my daughter, Michelle Morrison, I leave my collection of first edition books in the sum of $50,000. Michelle gasped, clearly disappointed. 50,000 was nothing compared to what they'd been expecting. "To my wife, Carol Morrison, I leave the sum of $100,000 and the right to remain in our family home for the remainder of her life, at which point it will be sold and the proceeds distributed according to the provisions that follow." Carol's face went white. "What? What about the rest? What about the business?" Mr. Walsh held up a hand. "Please, let me continue. To my son, Daniel Morrison, I leave my workshop tools, my truck, and the sum of $50,000. The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel finally looked up, confusion and anger warring on his face. "Dad left me $50,000? That's it. What about the business, the investments?" "I'm getting to that," Mr. Walsh said calmly, but I saw the hint of a smile on his lips. "The remainder of my estate, including Morrison Hardware, all investment accounts, the property on which the store stands, and all other assets not otherwise specified, I leave to my daughter in heart, Emma Rose Morrison." The world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I must have heard wrong. I must be dreaming. "What?" The word came from 3 mouths simultaneously. Mr. Walsh looked directly at me, and his expression was kind. "Emma, George wanted me to read you a letter. He wrote it when he made this will. May I?" I could only nod. I didn't trust my voice. He pulled out a handwritten letter, George's distinctive scrawl covering both sides of the page. "My dear Emma," he began, and I felt tears start to fall immediately. "If you're hearing this, then I've gone on ahead, and I hope I went with some dignity left and maybe made a few more of my terrible jokes before the end. I'm writing this letter because I need you to understand something that I should have told you more clearly when I was alive. You are my daughter. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice, which is a much stronger thing anyway." I heard Carol make a noise of protest, but Mr. Walsh continued reading. "I've watched you love my son for 15 years. I've watched you light up our family gatherings, take care of your mother-in-law when she was sick, bring joy and laughter into our lives. But more than that, I've watched you be kind when you didn't have to be. I've seen how you volunteer at that after-school program, teaching kids who have nothing. I've seen how you took care of your mother when she got older, never complaining. You have a good heart, Emma, the kind of heart that makes the world better. My hands were shaking so hard now that Rachel, who had come with me for support, put her arm around my shoulders. I've also watched these last few months as my son has pulled away from you. I've heard the conversations, the plans being made. I'm old and I'm sick, but I'm not blind and I'm not deaf. I know what my wife and daughter think of you, and I know they've poisoned my son's mind against you. It breaks my heart. I tried to talk sense into Daniel, but he wouldn't listen. He's become someone I don't recognize, and I blame myself. For that, I spoiled him, protected him too much, let his mother baby him too long. Daniel's face was red now, his hands clenched into fists on the table. So I'm doing what I should have done long ago. I'm leaving you my business, Emma, because I know you'll run it with integrity and heart. I'm leaving you the means to start over, to build a life without people who don't see your value. You've earned every bit of this, not through blood, but through love and loyalty and character. Things that matter more than DNA ever could. Mr. Walsh paused, his voice growing softer. The letter continues with some specific instructions about the business, but George wanted me to read you this final part. Emma, sweetheart, don't feel guilty about this. Don't let them make you feel like you don't deserve it. You deserve every good thing in this world. I just wish I'd had the courage to stand up to my family and tell them so while I could still look you in the eye. You were the best thing that happened to this family, even if they were too blind to see it. Live well, kiddo. Make me proud. You already have. All my love, George. The room erupted. Carol was on her feet, screaming about contesting the will, about undue influence. Michelle was crying, yelling that this wasn't fair. And Daniel was staring at me with such hatred that I barely recognized him. You manipulated him, hissed. You played the poor little girl with no daddy, made him feel sorry for you, and you manipulated a dying old man. Something inside me snapped. All the hurt, all the confusion, all the betrayal of the past week crystallized into a white-hot anger. I stood up, and my voice when I spoke was steady and clear. I loved him. I loved your father more than you ever did, apparently. Because love isn't about blood and money. Love is about showing up. Love is sitting in a hospital room at 3 a.m. because someone's scared. Love is learning about hardware and plumbing and electrical work because you want to share his interests. Love is listening to the same stories about the old days over and over because you know it makes him happy. I turned to look at each of them. I had exactly 3 conversations with George about his will. 3. The first was 5 years ago when Daniel and I bought our house, and George told me he'd made sure I was taken care of if anything happened. I thanked him and told him I didn't need anything. The second was 2 years ago at Christmas, when he'd had too much wine and started talking about legacy. I told him his legacy was the love he showed people. And the third was 3 weeks ago, in the hospital, when he told me he was proud of me and that he'd made sure I'd be okay. I told him all I needed was for him to get better. My voice broke on the last word, but I pushed through. I didn't ask for this. I didn't manipulate anyone. Your father made his choices based on your actions, not mine. Maybe instead of attacking me, you should ask yourselves why a man would choose to leave his life's work to his daughter-in-law instead of his own son. The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Walsh cleared his throat. I can confirm that George was of completely sound mind. I have documentation from 3 separate medical professionals. This will is ironclad. Emma, there are papers you'll need to sign, and we should discuss the business transition. Perhaps we could schedule another meeting. I nodded, unable to speak anymore. I just wanted to leave, to get out of that room, away from the family that had shown me who they really were. As I stood to go, Daniel grabbed my arm. "This isn't over, Emma. You're going to regret this." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. "No, Daniel. I don't think I will. The only thing I regret is wasting 15 years, loving someone who could turn on me so completely. Someone who cared more about money than about the person who stood beside him through everything." I pulled my arm free and walked out. Rachel followed me. Mr. Walsh walked us to the door with promises to call the next day, and I stepped out into the afternoon sunshine feeling like I'd been turned inside out. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork and learning more about running a hardware store than I ever thought I'd need to know. George had kept meticulous records, and hidden within them I found more notes to me. Instructions, advice, encouragement. He'd been planning this for longer than I'd realized, making sure I'd have everything I needed to succeed. The business was actually doing better than I'd thought. George had modernized in the last few years, set up an online ordering system, established relationships with contractors throughout the state. The staff, 3 longtime employees and 2 part-timers, were wary of me at first. They'd expected Daniel to inherit, had known him since he was a kid. But when I showed them George's letters, when they realized I was serious about learning and keeping his legacy alive, they rallied around me. Daniel filed for divorce 2 weeks after the will reading. I didn't contest it. Margaret, my lawyer, made sure I kept what was mine, half the equity in our house, half our remaining shared assets. I didn't ask for alimony, even though I probably could have gotten it. I just wanted it to be over. I sold our house. Too many memories. Too much pain. I couldn't walk through those rooms without seeing ghosts of who we used to be. Young and in love, planning our future, believing in forever. I bought a small cottage near the hardware store, something that was just mine. I painted the walls colors I loved, bought furniture that was comfortable instead of impressive. I adopted a dog, a scruffy rescue mutt named Hank who slept on my bed and made me laugh with his goofy antics. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, mourning not just my marriage, but the family I'd thought I had. There were days when the weight of running a business felt overwhelming, when I wanted to just walk away from it all. But I thought about George, about the trust he'd put in me, and I kept going. I discovered something about myself in those months of rebuilding. I was stronger than I'd thought. I was smarter than I'd given myself credit for. I had spent so many years being Daniel's wife, trying to fit into his family, trying to be what they wanted me to be, that I'd forgotten who I actually was. Now I had no choice but to figure it out. The hardware store became my refuge. I learned the inventory, learned to help customers troubleshoot their projects, learned to negotiate with suppliers. The regular customers, many of whom had known George for decades, started to trust me. They'd come in with their problems, and I'd help them find solutions, just like George used to do. Old Mr. Patterson, who'd been shopping there for 40 years, told me one day, "You know, I was skeptical when I heard George left you the place. Thought it was a mistake. But you're good at this, girl. You've got his heart for people." It meant more to me than he could have known. About 6 months after the funeral, I ran into Michelle at the grocery store. She looked right through me, started to push her cart past, but then she stopped. "He's miserable, you." "No, Daniel, in case you care." I did care. I hated that I cared. But 15 years of love doesn't just evaporate. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? You got everything. The business, the money. You destroyed our family. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "Michelle, I didn't destroy anything. Your father made a choice based on the character he saw in all of us. If you're unhappy with his decision, maybe ask yourself why he made it. Ask yourself why he trusted me with his legacy instead of his own son." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You always did think you were better than us." "No, I never thought that." I just loved you all and wanted to be part of your family. The tragedy is that you never wanted me there. You just tolerated me because Daniel chose me. And when you saw a chance to get rid of me and protect your inheritance, you took it. I walked away then, leaving her standing there. I'd said my piece. I was done carrying their guilt and their anger. It's been 2 years now since George's funeral. 2 years. Since Daniel told me I wasn't family anymore. The hardware store is thriving. I've expanded the online business, started offering weekend DIY workshops that have become really popular. I've hired 2 more employees, both women, both young and eager to learn the trades. George would have loved that. I still think about him. Every time I walk into the store and see his picture on the wall. Every time I help a customer and remember something he taught me. Every time I face a hard decision and imagine what advice he'd give. I went on a date last month. First one since the divorce was finalized. Nice guy. A contractor who comes into the store regularly. We got coffee, talked for hours. He asked me out again and I said yes. I'm not ready for anything serious. Might not be for a while. But it felt good to laugh, to talk to someone who saw me as just Emma, not as Daniel's ex-wife or George's chosen heir or any of the other labels people put on me. Rachel says I'm glowing, that I look happier than I have in years. Maybe she's right. I'm not the same person I was when I stood at that funeral, confused and heartbroken. I'm someone new, someone stronger, someone who knows her worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. I still have George's letters. All of them. The one Mr. Walsh read at the will reading, and dozens more I've found hidden throughout the business records, tucked into ledgers and files. Little notes of encouragement, reminders that I was valued and loved. He'd been preparing me for this, I realize now. Preparing me to stand on my own, to know that I was enough exactly as I was. The last letter I found was dated just 3 days before he died. I discovered it last week, tucked into a book on the office desk. Emma, it said, if you're reading this, then you made it. I knew you would. You've got more strength in your little finger than most people have in their whole body. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You were always family, sweetheart. Always. The only one who couldn't see that was you. Now build something beautiful. Make a life that makes you happy. That's all any of us can do, in the end. Love always, George. I keep that letter in my wallet now, along with a picture of George and me from a company picnic 3 years ago. We're both laughing at something, his arm around my shoulders in that protective, fatherly way he had. Looking at it doesn't make me sad anymore. It makes me grateful. Daniel tried to contact me a few months ago. A long email apologizing, saying he'd made a terrible mistake, that his mother and sister had manipulated him. He wanted to talk, wanted to see if we could work things out. I read it 3 times, looking for the man I'd loved somewhere in those words. But all I found was regret and excuses. I wrote back. 1 line. I forgive you, Daniel, but I've moved on. I hope you find peace. I do forgive him. Not because he deserves it necessarily, but because I deserve the peace that comes with letting go. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just free. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regretted accepting George's inheritance, if the money and the business were worth losing my husband and his family. The question always surprises me, because they've got it backward. I didn't lose anything. They did. I lost a husband who valued money over love, a family who never truly accepted me. What I gained was so much more valuable. I gained the knowledge that I could stand on my own. I gained a business I love, a community that respects me, a life that's authentically mine. I gained the confirmation that the father-daughter relationship I'd cherished with George was real and valued and meant something. Standing at that funeral, hearing Daniel say I wasn't family anymore, it broke me, but it also freed me. It freed me from trying to be enough for people who would never see me as such. It freed me from a marriage that had become hollow. It freed me to become who I was always meant to be. George used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they're given. He gave me a gift, not just of money and business, but of belief. He believed in me when no one else did, when I didn't even believe in myself. And I've tried to honor that every single day. The hardware store isn't just a business to me. It's George's legacy, yes, but it's also mine now. Every customer I help, every problem I solve, every person I employ, it's all part of something bigger than money or inheritance. It's about community, about showing up, about doing good work with integrity. I am family. I always was. Just not the family I thought I was joining when I married Daniel. I'm part of a bigger family now. The family of people who show up for each other. The family of people who choose love over blood, character over convenience. The family George chose for me. The one he knew I deserved all along. At the funeral, my husband said I wasn't family anymore. He was right, in a way. I wasn't family to him and his mother and sister, not really. I never had been. But I was family to George. I was family to the man who mattered most. And that was everything. The will proved otherwise. But honestly, I'd already known. Somewhere deep down, beneath all the hurt and confusion, I'd known. George had shown me every day of the 15 years I knew him that I was his daughter, that I belonged. I just hadn't believed it, hadn't thought I was worthy of it. Now I know better. Now I know that family isn't about blood or law or obligation. It's about choice. It's about who shows up when things get hard. It's about who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself. George saw mine. And because he did, I finally learned to see it too. That's the real inheritance he left me. Not the money, not the business. The knowledge that I was always enough. That I was always worthy. That I was always family. And no one can ever take that away from me again.